Hello everyone and welcome back to Terrifying Bedtime Tales. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. The rain had been falling for hours when Lily and Sam finally turned down the narrow, winding road that led to the house. It had been abandoned for years. No one in town even remembered the last time someone lived there. But that wasn't what made it special. It was something more, something older. The locals called it the house by the river, and though the town had long since stopped whispering its name, the house never stopped calling. That night, as the wind howled and the trees swayed, the house stood waiting. Its crumbling walls, dimly illuminated by the flicker of lantern light, seemed to be holding its breath. For as long as Lily had known the stories, she had never believed in ghosts. But now, standing at the threshold of that house, she could feel the weight of something unseen pressing down on her chest. And then she heard it, a soft murmur, barely audible over the storm. It sounded like someone calling her name. Lily turned to Sam, but he was too absorbed in the view to hear. And when she glanced back at the house, she could have sworn she saw something or someone standing in the window watching her. This hook sets the stage for the eerie atmosphere and introduces a compelling sense of mystery. The house is presented as a place of dark history, and the whispering voice foreshadows the supernatural elements to come. The imagery of the storm and the unsettling presence of the house invites the reader to question what will happen next, making them want to keep reading. The house stood silently at the edge of the river, its frame heavy with age. It had been years since anyone had lived there, and yet the owner, a local artist named Oliver, had come to it every year for as long as he could remember. Oliver needed a place to escape. The world around him felt suffocating, and his small town had never been conducive to creativity. The house, with its peeling paint and cobbled stone pathway, was the perfect retreat. Here, amidst the solitude of the river, surrounded by a thick forest of towering pines, he could write in peace, without the distractions of city life. Arriving late in the afternoon, the rain began to fall as soon as his car tires crunched along the gravel road leading to the house. It had been a long drive, but Oliver felt a familiar sense of relief as he caught his first glimpse of the house through the misty fog. He wasn't sure what drew him back every year. Perhaps it was the silence, the way the river's gentle current sang to him when the wind caught the trees, or maybe the quiet presence of the house itself. The rain, a steady tapping on the car windows, grew louder as Oliver unloaded his bags. The ground beneath his boots was slick with the remnants of earlier showers, but he hardly noticed the discomfort. The house was his sanctuary. Inside, the air was cool and musty, filled with the scent of old wood and the faint hint of something metallic. The living room, sparse and simple, featured a few mismatched chairs, a cracked fireplace, and an old, antique writing desk by the window. Beyond the fogged window panes, the river could barely be seen, its surface rippling beneath the rain. Oliver unpacked, setting up his writing materials, and then made his way to the kitchen. The familiar quiet of the house wrapped around him like a soft blanket, comforting in its solitude. He made himself a quick dinner of soup and bread, and as night fell, he settled down by the desk with a warm cup of tea. The rain, however, had other plans. At first it was soothing. The rhythmic patter against the windows created an ambient hum, but as the night deepened, the sound grew more intense. It wasn't just the rain. It was something more, like the sky was alive and pressing down on the earth. Oliver paused mid-sip. There was a sound outside, a low, scraping noise, like something being dragged across the ground. He stood, slowly, walking toward the window, peering through the fog glass. He could see nothing but the swirling mist and rain, the river beyond appearing like a dark, shifting mess. He thought nothing of it. It was a storm after all. There was always something eerie about storms when you were alone. The trees swayed violently in the wind, their shadows shifting like ghosts. That night, after he blew out the candle on his bedside table, Oliver lay still beneath the heavy blankets. The house creaked with age, and the wind moaned through the trees outside. The rain was relentless, and the sound of it against the roof was constant, like the steady tapping of an old typewriter. And then there was the whisper. It started as a faint murmur, so soft that it might have been the wind itself. Oliver, half awake and half lost in a dream, thought nothing of it. But then the whisper grew louder, more distinct, like someone speaking just outside his door. His heart quickened. He told himself it was just the house settling, just the storm pushing the trees to their limits. He had heard such noises before in his many years of visiting the house. Yet, despite the rational thoughts swirling in his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was out there. The whispering grew more urgent, more insistent. It was as though someone was beckoning him, calling his name in soft, urgent tones. Oliver, Oliver. The sound seemed to come from just outside the door. It chilled him to the bone. He could no longer ignore it. Grabbing the flashlight from his bedside table, he crept toward the door. The air felt unnaturally cold, and as he opened it, the house was still, too still. The hallway stretched before him in the dim light of the flashlight, and nothing appeared out of place. The sounds of the rain, now steady and insistent, filled the house, but the whisper had stopped. He took a few tentative steps, checking each room, convinced that someone was playing a prank on him. But there was nothing. No footsteps. No figures lurking in the shadows. His heartbeat began to slow as he stood in the middle of the hallway. Perhaps he had been imagining things after all. The second night came, and the rain had not let up. If anything, it had only intensified, and the river's murmur was louder than ever, blending with the roar of the storm. Oliver found it hard to concentrate on his writing, and his thoughts often wandered back to the strange occurrences of the night before. He had nearly convinced himself that the whisper had been his mind playing tricks on him. But then, as dusk settled in, the sound came again, this time louder and more distinct. The scrape, a low dragging sound, as if something heavy was being moved slowly across the ground. Oliver's stomach churned. He looked out the window toward the forest, the rain now coming down in sheets. But the dark was impenetrable. He couldn't see anything beyond the small circle of light cast by the lamp in the corner. He tried to ignore it, returning to his desk and picking up the pen again. But the noise continued. It didn't stop. Every few minutes, a low scrape echoed through the room, causing his skin to prickle. Finally, after what felt like hours of endless rain and scraping noises, Oliver stood, his nerves fraying. He grabbed his coat and made for the door, intent on discovering the source of the noise. The rain hit him like a wall as he stepped outside. It was deafening, the wind howling, the world reduced to a blur of mist and water. He glanced around the yard, but there was no sign of anything unusual, except for the path leading into the woods. Something glinted in the distance, half hidden by the underbrush. Oliver squinted, heart pounding in his chest. He took a step forward, then another, drawn by an inexplicable urge. The further he walked, the more oppressive the air became. The rain seemed to follow him, each drop heavier than the last. The distant river could still be heard, but it sounded almost alien, like the sound of an ocean far away. And then in the clearing ahead he saw it. An old wooden chair. It sat at the center of the clearing, drenched in rain, its back facing the house. The chair was familiar to him. He recognized it. It was the same one that had been in the living room when he had first arrived. He froze. The scraping sound, now louder and more distinct, echoed through the woods once more. It was as though the chair was alive, moving against its will, dragging itself across the forest floor. Oliver took a step forward, but before he could move any further, the chair stopped. The rain fell heavier, each drop seeming to pulse in time with his racing heartbeat. The world was silent, save for the crackling of the trees above him. And then something moved in the shadows. The final night at the house was the longest, the most terrifying, and the most surreal. Oliver could not escape the feeling that something was watching him. It was as though the house itself had become a living, breathing entity, each room filled with secrets, each creak in the floorboards a whisper from the past. The wind howled outside, a mournful sound that seemed to echo from the depths of the forest. As the night wore on, the sounds of the house grew more intense, more frantic. The whispers returned, louder than ever, surrounding him from all sides. The scratching, the dragging, the low guttural moans, it was all too much. The walls seemed to close in around him, and the house felt less like a retreat and more like a prison. Oliver rushed to the door, throwing on his coat and grabbing his flashlight. He didn't care anymore. He had to leave. He couldn't stay. But when he reached the door, something stopped him. The house was silent. The whispering had stopped. The wind had died down. Even the rain had ceased, leaving behind an eerie stillness in the air. In that moment, Oliver realized that whatever force had been behind the haunting, it wasn't a force of nature. It was something tied to the house itself. And the house didn't want him to leave. The next morning, the rain had stopped, and the sun broke through the mist, casting a soft, golden light over the house and the river. The world was quiet now, peaceful. But Oliver was gone. His belongings were left behind, his suitcase still packed by the door. The only thing that remained was the chair, sitting motionless in the center of the clearing, still wet from the rain. And the river, flowing slowly by the house, whispered its secrets to the trees. As the years passed, no one ever dared to stay at the house again. The locals spoke in hushed tones of the man who had disappeared, and the house by the river became a place of legend, a place where the rain never stopped. Certainly, let's continue the story with an escalation of the eerie atmosphere, adding more layers of mystery and the haunting presence of the house. It was years later when a young couple, Lily and Sam, found themselves driving down the same gravel road that led to the house by the river. They were looking for a quiet place to spend a weekend, far from the distractions of city life. Sam had always been an adventurous soul, eager to explore old, forgotten places. Lily, on the other hand, was more cautious, drawn to the tranquil charm of nature, but wary of the unknown. The house by the river had always been a subject of local legend. Its reputation had only grown over time, and its mystery captivated them both. Lily had heard stories from an old woman at the farmer's market in the town, who spoke in hushed tones of the man who had vanished without a trace, and how the house had stood empty ever since. The rain and fog surrounding it only added to its allure. "You sure about this?" Lily asked, glancing nervously out the car window as the landscape blurred into thick mist. "Absolutely," Sam replied with a grin. "This place has character. Plus, it'll be great for our photography project. Old, abandoned houses make the best subjects." The road wound through dense trees, their branches tangled like skeletal hands. The farther they went, the more the world seemed to disappear behind the veil of rain. When they finally reached the house, it was much as Lily had imagined, weathered, with the river rolling quietly in the distance, its surface dark and churning. The house itself was a crumbling relic of the past. Its wooden frame was sagging, the roof covered in moss, the windows black with the remnants of old, cracked glass. Despite its dilapidation, it had a strange charm. As Sam opened the car door, the air seemed to grow colder, the rain louder, pressing in on them as if the house had been waiting for them. The couple set up inside, placing their bags on the old wooden floors, their footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. The fireplace still stood, though it was covered in soot and long untended. Sam immediately started taking photos, fascinated by the decay. Lily, however, couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching them. There was something unsettling about the silence that enveloped them. The rain outside intensified as the evening grew darker. The walls groaned as if the house was shifting with the wind. Lily tried to focus on the beauty of the place, the cracked furniture, the peeling wallpaper, the faded curtains that fluttered ever so slightly in the draft. but the atmosphere felt heavy, oppressive. "What do you think happened here?" Lily asked, turning to Sam as he adjusted his camera. He shrugged, peering through the lens. "Who knows? Old houses have a way of collecting stories. Some people get scared of places like this. Maybe there was a death here or something. That would explain the whispers." Lily froze at his words. "Whispers?" Sam looked up, surprised. "You haven't heard them? That old woman in town said this place is haunted. I thought it was just the wind, but now that you mention it..." "No," Lily said quietly. "I don't think it's the wind." Later, as the couple sat by the fireplace, the house seemed to breathe around them. The wind rattled the windows, and the crackling of the fire did little to dispel the unsettling feeling that crept over them. They ate a quick dinner, shared a bottle of wine, and talked about the photographs Sam had taken. The room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the fire and the soft glow of their lanterns. But as the night deepened, an unusual sound broke through the quiet, a low murmur, just barely audible over the storm outside. It started as a whisper, but grew clearer, closer. "Lily," a voice called softly. "Lily." Lily's heart skipped a beat. Her eyes flicked to Sam, but he was still absorbed in his notes, unaware. The voice repeated her name, faint, like a whisper on the wind. But there was no wind inside the house. She looked toward the window, but the rain blurred everything beyond the glass. "Sam," she said, her voice trembling. "Did you hear that?" Sam looked up, his expression puzzled. "What?" "I didn't hear anything." Lily stood, setting her wine glass down on the table. "I swear I heard my name," she murmured. It came from the hallway. The house seemed to hold its breath as she moved toward the doorway, the darkness beyond the light of the fire feeling almost alive. Sam followed her, skeptical but curious. As they reached the hallway, the sound came again, this time louder, more distinct. Lily, her stomach churned. The voice wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the walls. The air in the hallway felt colder, more oppressive, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Before either of them could react, the sound stopped. Silence descended once again, thick and suffocating. Sam looked at Lily, his brow furrowed in confusion. But Lily was no longer looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on something in the corner of the hallway, a figure, or perhaps a shadow, standing just beyond the edge of the light. It wasn't clear, but it was there, just at the edge of her vision, shifting like smoke. "What is that?" she whispered. Sam's heart rate quickened as he turned toward the corner. There was nothing there, just the empty hallway. "Lily, you're imagining things. It's probably just the storm playing tricks on you." But Lily wasn't convinced. Her breathing was quick, her body frozen with a sense of dread. The shadow in the corner remained there, flickering in the dim light like it was part of the house itself. She could feel its presence, like it was waiting for her to approach. With every fiber of her being screaming for her to turn and run, Lily stepped forward. The next morning, the house appeared much the same, but Lily could not shake the feeling that something had changed overnight. The fog clung to the trees outside, the rain still steady in the distance, but the air felt heavier, as if the house was no longer just abandoned. It had become a living, breathing entity. Sam, ever the skeptic, didn't seem to notice the shift. He was already out on the porch, snapping photographs of the landscape, while Lily stayed inside, lingering in the living room where she could hear the river outside. Then, the whispers came again, louder this time. "Lily, Her pulse quickened. She was certain now there was something here, something that had been waiting for them to arrive. As she stood near the window, looking out over the river, something caught her eye. Through the mist and fog, she saw a figure standing by the water, tall, thin, with a dark cloak flowing behind it. It seemed to be staring directly at the house. Lily's breath hitched. She turned toward Sam, but when she looked back, the figure was gone. By the evening of the second day, Lily could no longer deny it. The house was not just abandoned. It was cursed, its walls steeped in the memories of those who had once lived there. As night fell, she told Sam about the figure by the river. He listened, his face growing more serious. The air was thick with tension as the storm outside raged. He finally agreed to help her explore the house's history, searching for any clues that might explain what was happening. In the attic, buried beneath years of dust and old furniture, they discovered a journal, yellowed and brittle. The ink faded with time. The journal belonged to Oliver, the artist who had last lived in the house. It detailed his final days, his descent into madness, and his obsession with the house. The whispers he wrote had become too loud to ignore. The house had started to speak to him, telling him things, terrible things about his past. It had taken everything from him, his sanity, his memories. Oliver's final entry was a chilling one. The house doesn't let you leave. It keeps you here forever. As the storm howled through the night, Lily and Sam realized that they were not alone. The whispers, the shadows, the strange figure by the river, they were all part of the house's curse. It had lured them here, just as it had lured Oliver before them. And now, like Oliver, they would never leave. This continuation heightens the tension and explores the house's dark history, leaving the characters trapped in the cycle that has ensnared others before them. The whispers, the presence of the house, and the eerie atmosphere continue to build until they can no longer escape.